Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Connections to Today series. My name is Juan Cabrera, the National Humanities Specialist here at Savas Learning Company, formerly known as Pearson Education. Now, in this series, we're going to provide you with practical tips, resources, and strategies to help engage your students with relevant instruction and, like the title says, connect them to today. In today's Connection to Today session, we will discuss the early republic and examine what is the role of the president. Now, this is something that is obviously very topical, right? This is in the news. Your students are going to be talking about it, and we want to provide you with some resources that you can use to truly teach the role of the president. Now, when we speak of the president, we know that there are ways when you're introducing George Washington and when you're introducing other presidents, there are ways that you as educators bring in things to hook your students, right? We know that there are things out there like movie clips that show presidents. There are personal accounts that you may already show. You may have primary sources and songs that you use to introduce the topic of the presidency. But today what I want to focus on is how can we connect the topic of the presidency and the role of the president to today? How can we make it matter to our students? And I want to ask you a question. Now, when we think about the way we communicate, especially right now during a pandemic, it's evolved, right? Think of the ways we communicated 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. It continues to evolve. That's very true of the presidency as well. George Washington's cabinet only had 3 members, and now look at the cabinet today. It's well beyond 3. The president's role has evolved and continues to evolve, and we want our students to know about that. So today we're going to provide you with some resources, some tips, and some other things to help you teach that while also helping you to make it relevant and connect it to today. Today's goals. Number 1, we're going to identify resources and strategies to engage and inform our students. Number 2, we're going to equip our students to succeed now and in the future. And number 3, we're going to share resources to engage, inform, and prepare our students for success. So let's start off with this question. Why do we want to use connections to today? Well, if you've ever heard this from your students, you can virtually raise your hand or chat in, yes. Why does it matter? This doesn't matter to me today. That happened so long ago, right? When it comes to our students, they think of social studies and history as just maps. They might think of it as that boring old textbook that sat on their desk. A lot of them, if you're teaching early American history, they just see reenactment figures and portraits. They don't see a real picture of George Washington or Benjamin Franklin. So these are things that are difficult for them to understand and to connect it to their lives today because to them it's ancient history, even though we know it was only a few hundred years ago. We want to connect to today because we want to meet students on their level. And although it can be a scary place for us as educators to think about meeting them on their level, we want them to care. We want them to be engaged in our classroom. So let's meet them where they're at. Let's provide them some resources that are, again, something that's topical, something that is fun, something that talks to them in the way that they're used to being talked to. So for that, let's start by talking about connecting them to today through pop culture, all while looking at that question of what is the role of the president? So how can we connect them to today through pop culture? Well, at the beginning today, we talked about how many of you may already have your own movies, clips, and things like that. But what we do in our program, Social Studies Interactive, is we provide a hook and inspire section at the beginning of every topic to help you connect to today. For that, I'm going to show you on our Savas Realize website how you can use this to really reach your students. First, what you'll find is our question, what is the role of the president? And we'll see how maybe it's changed over time. But not only do we provide your students with that connection to today, topic and prompt, we provide you with discussion questions and, most importantly, my favorite part, links to different resources. Now, I talked about how many of you might bring movies, and you can chat that in. If you have a movie or something that you use to reference pop culture in the presidency, let us know. Share it with your educators and your colleagues. But you can see here as I scroll down, we provide you with a variety of videos. And these are links to popular movies that show the president in action. And this also shows the president's evolving role. So you can bring in these different types of pop culture links, moments in history that show the president. There are also media items, again, website links, articles, and more, things from popular movies and books and other items that bring in some things that the students would find relevant. So to recap, we provide you with ways to connect your students to today and hook and inspire them in our social studies interactive programs. But how else can you connect them to pop culture? Well, you can do it through music and hip hop history. Bonus points for any of you on this call or watching this that can chat in what song on the left this is from or from what it's from. Now, I know many of you are chatting it in, so I'm going to give you a moment. But the reason why it's important to reach students through hip hop history is because our students love hip hop, right? Every time you go to look at the Billboard charts or the Spotify charts, hip hop is always at the top. And this is a great way for you to utilize it because there are some great hip hop history songs out there that teach what was going on. You can see the example on the left, and if you've guessed it, it is from the Hamilton musical. You can use that, and what a blessing that has been for hip hop and history to merge together and to be in the spotlight. And in our program and even online, you can find additional resources that teach history through hip hop. And I'll play you an example of Politics in the Republic.
Launching a new nation began with Washington's inauguration. He took an oath of office as the president. He knew his actions would set a precedent. An economic crisis ushered a financial plan. A national bank suggested by Hamilton.
Yes, I was bobbing my head to that, and I hope that you are because your students will be too. You can see the vocabulary terms are highlighted. There's concepts that are key and they're being taught. This is another great way to reach students at their levels and connect them to today instead of just providing them with the vocabulary list. Now, how are some other things and other ways that you can connect your students to today? Well, when we're thinking about that question, what is the role of the president? We can connect them to today through role playing. Now, how can you do that? Well, online, you can search for a game called Be Washington. This is actually from George Washington's Mount Vernon estate online. So if you've ever been to the estate, they have an online presence as well. And they've developed this game where the person in Hamilton who played George Washington actually narrates this game as well. So there's a cool tie in there to Hamilton. This is a great way for your students to actually step into the shoes of George Washington and to figure out how was the role of president how was it changing and how was it evolving even from the get-go? What was George Washington having to deal with? Because if your students are going to learn about how it evolved after Washington, you want to set the foundation of what was he having to deal with. In addition to role-playing, you can also have your students take a virtual tour of the White House, and there are many of these online. We're going to provide you with links to all of these resources and access to it, but I want to show you the 360 White House virtual tour. This is a great way, again, for you to use something like Google Maps and Google Expeditions, where your students can walk through what it was like to be a president. You know, they're learning about the role-playing, they're learning about the vocabulary and the foundation, but this is a great way for them to just see what the White House actually looks like because many of your students, they've only seen the outside. And right now during a pandemic, they may not be able to take a tour, right? So this is a cool way for them to see what it actually looks like and what those presidents were going through. In addition to that, another great way for them to look at the evolving role of the president is to actually step into their shoes and read about their daily agendas. Online, you can find articles and agendas of what the presidents are doing on a day-to-day basis. We're going to share with you this one that talks about the day of the life and the President of the United States with President Barack Obama. It walks you through his schedule, even his workout schedule, how he's debriefed on the national security from the National Security Advisor, and more. But a really cool way for you, again, to show them what Washington was dealing with, and then what Barack Obama was dealing with and what he was being briefed on. So we've looked at how you can connect your students to today through pop culture, how you can connect them to today through role playing, all while looking at and examining the question of what is the role of the president. But another way you can do that is through sources. And when we say sources, the first thing that jumps to my mind is primary sources. If we're looking at the role of the president and how it's changed, a great way to introduce that is through primary sources, right? You can look at something like Washington's inaugural address and even his farewell address, and you can read through this and you can figure out, well, what changed? What is he advising against? What is he warning against? Primary sources are always a great way because students are hearing it from the actual person. In addition, political cartoons are a great way of showing people the role of the president and how it's evolving through the public perception. Here's one where we're looking at the election of this past November of 2020, and you can see whether you are on one side or the other, we were all kind of anxious and frustrated at times. So it's a really funny take on what was going on at that time. When you're talking about the election of 2020, which is going to happen naturally, again, you may want to ground it in how presidents were also dealing with different types of issues. Thomas Jefferson was dealing with the Embargo Act. You can talk about how each president over time has dealt with major issues, and you can examine them through those primary sources, through political cartoons, and more. And this is an example from our program where we introduce you to political cartoons, but we also provide your students with ways to analyze the titles, analyze images, inference, and more. Last, your students have now looked at the role of the president through pop culture, maybe movies. They've looked at it through hip hop history. They've seen how George Washington, what he did as a president, all the way to Barack Obama, and what was he doing in his day-to-day life and how the role of the president was evolving. But we know that you also want your students to apply all that they have learned. So how can you do that? Well, in our Social Studies Interactive program, we provide digital activities where your students are able to drag and drop. They can look at something like the Federalists and the Republicans, and they can see, well, people were disagreeing not just today, but all the way from the beginning of our founding of our government. They were arguing about certain things like constitutional rights and how much power the government was going to have versus the states, etc. And they can drag and drop whether these were items that the Federalists preferred or items that the Republicans preferred. And we have built all of this for you. And this is just one example. There are multiple digital interactives for you to use to help teach your students. And eventually you want to take all of that items, right? Since we've talked about that connections to today and how the role of the presidency has changed. We don't want your students to just simply store all of that in their head and then forget about it. We're going to actually encourage your students to go and take action. And in every one of our topics in Social Studies Interactive, you will find that connection to today, but you will also find that at the end of the topic, we encourage them to take action on everything that they've learned. Now, how do we do that? Well, in this instance, we're going to encourage your students to choose one of the following topics about what the president of the office is like today. They can choose the Electoral College and conduct research into the way in which presidential elections are won and leading ideas for altering or abolishing the system. They can choose the Constitution and read Article 2 to find out about the qualifications, roles, and responsibilities of the president. Or they can choose option 3, the Imperial Presidency, and discuss how has the role of the president changed over time. Has the president become more powerful? Why or why not? You can see that today we've provided you resources that can help you with these options, and you can even add more and look through our resources so that your students can complete these activities successfully. They can write an essay, they can have a civic discussion, they can create a speech. There are multiple ways for them to take action, But again, in Social Studies Interactive, we encourage you to help connect your students to today and encourage them to take action on what they're learning about. Now, you've seen some incredible resources today. Some of them are from our Savvis Social Studies programs and Social Studies Interactive, and some of them were external. Well, the good news is we are going to provide you with all of those resources, whether they are ours or whether we have highlighted some great stuff that lives out there on the internet. So what we encourage you to do is to go to savvisrealize.com. You can see the username and the password on your screen. Go ahead and screenshot this, put it in your notes app, take a picture of it on your phone, do whatever you got to do. But remember this, because you're going to want to explore. And when you log in using those credentials, you will find a playlist that is called Connections to Today. Everything we talked about today is in that playlist. You will find the links to the virtual field trip. You will find songs and all sorts of really cool stuff. You'll also find an Early Republic flipped video. That is a teacher actually explaining the Early Republic and what was going on to your students. It's about 3 to 5 minutes long, and it's a great way for you to provide your students with a lesson. We also provide resources to help you teach that lesson, websites, and more. Thank you for joining us today. And because you've joined us today, your local representatives will be reaching out to you so that you are able to request and receive a sample from them. So they'll reach out to you, introduce themselves if you don't already know them. And at that time, they'll ask you if you want a sample of our products. I've already provided you with digital access, but you may want a print version of this, and we can provide those samples. Now, in addition to that, we are asking and encouraging you to submit your own ideas for a connection to today. And I've heard that there's a contest coming soon. So on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a QR code. If you would like, you can take out your phone and just take out your camera on your phone and scan that. Just put the camera over that QR code and it'll take you to our site where you can input your own connection to today. Tell us how you are connecting your students to today through social studies. And you don't have to just submit about the president. You can give us other ideas, and we may highlight some of those on our blog sites and more. So we appreciate everybody being here. We appreciate your time, and we thank you for listening to us as we try our best to help you connect your students to today. We look forward to working with you in the future and hearing from you. Have a great day.